Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Barry James, and we're going to talk about change, global change, personal change, how we're all in transition, all kinds of things like that. And I think it'll be fascinating, and I think it'll be worthwhile. And I'm glad you're here. Thank you, Barry, for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be on the Edcast.
Thank you. And so tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and how that feeds your sense of what is happening in the world.
Okay, so my background is mostly tech. So by the time I'd left university too many decades ago, I'd already been a programmer for about 8 years. And have been kind of at the forefront of tech for most of my career. I'm still chair something called the Frontier Technologies Association, but these days I spend most of my time thinking about working on what you might call civic or public interest issues. Thinking about the mess that we've made of the planet, and that we're making of the planet, how we got here, and what we can do about it. So I run something called the Humane Economics, which was an inquiry into that, which has led to something called Humane X, which is a network seeking to do something about it.
Fascinating. And where are you located?
Sorry?
Where are you located? Where are you?
Oh, I'm in Sheffield, right in the middle of England.
Very nice. I figured that from your accent, of course. If you're there, it's not an accent. It's hearing your own voice. So when during your career did you begin to see that the way we were going about the functioning of the world was not working? How far back in time does that?
It goes back to at least 1989, and I think well before that as well. But 1989 was when I set up my first company, which was a software company, and the reason I set it up wasn't the usual sort of reasons. It was specifically because I could see even back then that business had become well, it wasn't a force for good in the world. Quite the opposite. It had become something which was damaging to humanity and damaging to the world. And I expressly set it up and trying to create a new kind of business DNA that would be a force for good in the world, as well as, fulfill all the purposes of a business. So I suppose I was, now I look back, the idea of a social enterprise, which is not too dissimilar to, wasn't current. I'd never heard of it back then, but for probably decades since. But that was the idea. So it goes back a long way.
Before we get too far down the road, would you define what a social enterprise is?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's common currency there, but it's a bit like charity, but not. So it's fundamentally a business with a purpose. So that is either for a purpose, a bit, as I say, a bit like a charity, but it can take many different forms.
It's sort of a for-profit charity.
Some are for profits, many are are not, but the whole point, I suppose, is the point of the business isn't profit. Profits are necessary, but the point of the business is the point of the business.
Right, exactly. I think one of the other terminologies for that is a B Corp. I've heard C Corp. C Corps are common, common language of how a company is designed. But B Corps were, I think that's the term. It arose as a way of talking about that a company that has a social benefit that is seeking to create through its business structure.
Yeah, I know a little about B Corp, and I know that there's an organization that you can join and be certified as a B Corp in the States. It's here now as well, and we have other similar schemes as well. But it kind of goes back a little while, at least 20, maybe 30 years. I don't know.
So I'm asking because this is what I saw here. As you saw this. I'm calling the fracturing or the breakdown or the breaking of the way businesses function in society. Did you see that there was a response from of growing numbers of charities, or we call them nonprofits here, or non-government agencies there? Did you see that growing as a way of responding to the needs that a community would have?
I think you could certainly, track that. There's certainly a strong correlation, and yeah, there's some relationship there. I suppose I would say that, and I think many charities, particularly and probably social enterprises, would agree that they tend to have to be sticking plasters on the problem rather than solutions for it. And I think most would say, certainly now, if not then, that there's some things that are fundamentally wrong that we need to revisit and get right.
So at the same time, there were new organizations forming. They have been forming for a century, but these global corporations, global institutions that were forming to address the larger problems that exist. And so what have you seen there as whether they're helpful or not helpful?
I think when you kind of stand back and look at these global multinational organizations, they, objectively, they tick all the boxes of being a Frankenstein's monster. They are run on principles that have nothing to do with humanity, and nothing to do with ecology or care for the planet. They are given powers that are well above that of an individual human being. They straddle borders, and they are required to have almost no responsibilities. So I think, from that point of view, if you were to make a sort of checklist for a Frankenstein's monster, I think we've created some.
So how do you think we got here? What's the path? Or what was the decision processes over? I mean, I'm going back 100 years. I'm going back to the end of the First World War. That's how far back I go, and seeing what you're talking about. So how do you see that having unfolded over the last century?
I think it's actually a story in two parts, really, over the last century, almost exactly two parts. In that, technology, be it telegraph, phone, and so on, has made the sort of global sorts of businesses possible, and obviously the internet has accelerated that, and so on. But this, part of the research that we did, looking for the roots of our really intractable problems, the ones we don't seem to be able to tackle. We can't even slow down in our race to fill the atmosphere with more CO2 and such, let alone pause or reverse at the moment, even though we've known about the dangers and the damage for decades. So looking at the roots of that, it actually became clear. We went back in terms of the research to Adam Smith and even before Adam Smith. And obviously there's some interesting things that came out of that in terms of, the economics and the economic thinking. But there was a real change that became operative from about 1970, which actually originally came from work done by Hayek and a group of economists known as the Mount Pelerin Society, who were scared of the world being central, dominated by central planning. They were responding to communism, and they came up with a set of economics, or they're now known as neoliberal economics, which have been, I choose my words advisedly, foisted on the world. So they, there's a famous key point on the 13th of September in 1970, when Milton Friedman, who is one of the key disciples of this ideology, and it is an ideology, it isn't science, it's an ideology, was published in the New York Times saying the social responsibility, in fact he called it the Friedman Doctrine, the social responsibility of a business is to maximize its profits, and in doing that, and the other things around market supremacy and so on, is the nub of the thing. We've moved from business before then would see a need for balance, but if you're maximizing anything, whether it's profits or anything else, by definition, you're going to create imbalance.
Right.
And of course, we all know that since then, through Reagan and Thatcher, that was not just popularized in business, but was brought into the heart of government as well, and has remained at the center ever since. And so much so that we're now living in a world with generations of people for whom it's kind of part of the framework of their thinking. That it's not even debatable, even though it's debunked thoroughly. The toxicity and danger of it are well known, but it is now the basis, or the operating system on the basis of which runs both corporate business and governments around the world.
I have a framework that I call the two global forces, and there is a global force, a global force of centralized institutions of governance and finance, and then there's a global force of networks of relationships, and they're not necessarily incompatible, but in the current situation they are. And the way I look at that is that the people who are organized or oriented towards the centralized planning, which now includes both the left and the right. I mean, it's kind of a monoculture, so that it's very difficult if you're just a small business person to know what you are to do, because all the rules are set against you. And if you're going to build a building, a commercial building, the steps you have to go through, the taxes you have to pay, the fees that you have to pay, make it really prohibitive to being able to do it, and therefore the cost of building it contributes to the growth of inflation that we are all experiencing. And so I've lived in a number of places where the dominant question that we're facing in that community is affordable housing. Where is that going to come from? And in many cases, the community doesn't want to build those houses or build those apartments. They want to control how they are built. And so they're going to define it the way they want to define it. I think the Adam Smith capitalist model has been turned on its head and turned it into not a something that an entrepreneur or someone like you and I would practice, but something that the government uses as a tool to operate the nation or the community or the state or the city. And so we're kind of stuck in that. And so I was wondering, I'm leading to a question, so sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. So what I see, and this is what I've been watching over about 30 years, is how the whole orientation towards systems thinking has invaded that world and become kind of the rationalization for all these things. We look at things from a systems point of view, and therefore it's logical that this is the way it should be. When I look at some of these systems drawings and diagrams and read some of this stuff, and I'm thinking, what are they leaving out here? What's missing here? And so I'm curious as to how you see planning as a part of this whole scenario that we're in, which is causing us to be in this kind of extraordinary time of change.
Yeah, let me address something you mentioned a moment or two ago and come back to that, because when you were talking about small businesses, non-corporate, let's call them non-corporate businesses, small, medium, micro, startups, and so on, live in a different world. You're absolutely right, and it's observable here, and I think in the States as well, but I know here better, that there is a different ethos, and there is still there's a kind of striving and an expectation that you want to become a corporate business. If you ever get to talk to a bank manager these days, that would be the expectation.
Yeah.
And it certainly was when I was building a business. But there is a difference in culture, and there are plenty of businesses who don't want to travel that route, just want to be a useful part of a community, or communities. And I think worth noting as a kind of later part of the development of what we're talking about is the financialization of the economy, by which I mean, we used to view banks and the financial infrastructure as a service to the economy, and that was right. What we've done latterly is to reclassify them, I believe in accounting terms as well as everything else, as producers within the economy, which allows them to commoditize money. And the effects of that are hugely deleterious, not least that we've now got an economy which is not a level playing field by a very, very, very long chalk, but is hugely tilted in favor of asset owners. So, if you kind of look, and Thomas Piketty and others have, talked about this over the last few years, and it's got worse since. If you look at the way that the economy operates, it's like a pump that takes money out of the economy in industrial quantities, and it grants it to the asset owners, or in other words, the richer you are, the more you got to extract. So that's a huge factor in this. Your question there was more about planning, wasn't it?
Well, I think that a lot of this has been rationalized by the mechanism of systems thinking and systems dynamics. And I spent a lot of time in the 90s learning this, and I found it very compatible with the way I think. Oh, I really like this stuff. And then I began to realize that there was sort of an amoral aspect to it, that the plan was, I'm going to use some provocative language, the plan was God and we worship the plan.
Yeah.
When there was not much scrutiny, and still is not much scrutiny of the plan, and if you're probably not unlike me, you've watched plans implemented by companies over the years, and you realize that if you don't factor in incompetence and waste, you're not planning very well.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. There's kind of different views on systems thinking, isn't there? One of my friends is right in the thick of that movement because he sees this as a way of bringing sanity and rebalance. Leaving that aside for a moment, I once asked a newly minted doctor of economics, what's an economy for? And her eyes widened. The thought had never crossed her mind, and the thought was clearly blowing her mind at that moment.
Good for you.
And it's the question we've not been asking. We've somehow or other slipped to a place where the means have become the end, where the means of making things better for people and humanity that's become irrelevant, and it's the numbers. It's about GDP and so on, and the assumption being if you make the numbers bigger, if you grow the economy, everything else will sort itself out. Well, hello world, look around. Let's look around us. How did that work out?
Is there a point where we hit a wall?
I think people I talk to, people I respect, people like Steve Keen, who is a sane economist, or otherwise known as a heterodox economist. I know a few of them, has been warning for some time, and saying we have a limited amount of time to turn this round, and what's at risk is Western civilization and breakdown. And actually, ahead of all our expectations, we've had the UN in the last week say the era of global warming is over. We're heading into the era of global boiling, with all sorts of consequences that are incredibly hard to predict, but none of them towards stability, and very few of them good. So I know sane and sensible people who've moved literally to the north of Scotland to get as far away as possible from population centres in the last 2 or 3 years, because they believe we're that close. So we continue to accelerate towards a cliff edge.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that we have not grown the economy, and we have not grown people. We have grown the structures that are representative of the economy. So the administrative state is the thing that has grown over the last 50 years. And I think you can go back to 1970 as that point in time, went off the gold standard, went on to fiat currency. And I think all those things, that era, caused the changes that we went. There was an interesting biography of Jack Welch that came out last year, where it described how he dismantled General Electric from being this consumer products business to simply being a financial institution that makes money. Turned it into a bank, but not a bank that's doing much good, but just a bank that's making money.
Which is iconic of the pattern we were just talking about, isn't it?
Well, and in the book, what the author is saying is that the people that were trained under Jack Welch were the ones that went out and became the CEOs of all these other companies over the last 30 or 40 years. So it's a pattern. It's a pattern of behavior that we can identify. I think that's where I think it's important for us to be able to see those patterns and see the change that we're going through. So so let me ask you this: where do you find hope in this vast scenario of challenge?
Yeah, that's a really good question, isn't it? I find hope in the mission, if you like. First of all, to understand it, which we're kind of seeking out of that phase. It's clear to me that those economic doctrines that we were talking about have been embedded within our operating system at governmental level and at corporate level, and kind of moving into the next phase of thinking about how do we change that. Especially given the fact that we've got an unknown but most probably short time scale to do it, and that's the mission that I'm on right now. I have a little hope of that because I've managed in my history, I've managed to make some unexpected changes to the financial system here in the UK, which has also been adopted elsewhere. So going back about 10 years or so, at the beginning, when I was first championing crowdfunding in the UK, the regulator here were very anti, but it turned out when I got to know the full picture, they're just generally anti-innovation, made their jobs harder. And I got to understand how they thought about that, and basically came up with a solution, which was to say, I thought about it for a while and went, okay, so maybe they should have a head of innovation on their board. Would that work? Let's see, if I was the head of it, oh God, no, that's not going to work. And came up with the idea ultimately of an innovation unit to sit within the regulator. Long story short, we campaigned for 2 years, 20 months actually, and it was adopted, it was announced, it was built, and it's been very effective in changing the way that the regulator in the UK operates, and has now been copied and emulated in 50 other territories around the world. So that gives me a little bit of hope. It's not the same thing by any stretch of the imagination, but that's the trail that we're on, is to try and work out how we fundamentally end, or at least create some cracks in the capture of our institutions nationally and globally, that are forcing them to kind of follow this imperative, even though we all know how damaging it is.
So as you look forward, and let's look, say, a generation ahead, how would you define the kind of leadership that is needed? And I'm assuming that you're going to say something that's different than what we've had, but what do you see as the nature of leadership going forward?
That's a really good question, Ed. Let me preface, while I think about that for a moment,
Okay.
let me preface
Sure.
What I'm saying by very different to the leadership that we've seen of late. So, I don't think it's much different either side of the pond, with some perhaps honourable exceptions from time to time. We've seen more and more political leadership being about playing the game, being about, winning the numbers, winning the votes, regardless of the consequences. So it's not that kind of leadership. I think the kind of leadership we need, I guess, are change makers, are people who can step outside of the framing that we have at the moment, and understand it from the vantage point of both of humanity and of ecology and the planet, and can provide the challenges and interventions that we need to end the captive thinking that we have.
Yeah, I agree with you. And where do they come from? I think that's part of the problem, is that there is a system of advancement that happens within the cultures of business and politics, where people get advanced. They're not really making decisions to advance themselves. People are coming to them. We're going to advance you, and we'll fund your campaign, and they become the chosen person to be the representative of a certain group of people
Yeah.
who represents a certain mindset or a certain ideology, and so the person who ends up in the principal role is really there to protect the people who really are in charge from scrutiny.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether the pattern is a little different here to there, but you certainly make me think of our worst ever prime minister, who lasted, as you know, for a matter of weeks.
Right.
Liz Truss, disastrous on every possible level, including economic, which was supposed to be the forte, backed by actually the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is called something else in the States, but actually its line traces back to the Mount Pelerin Society, would you believe? It's the same organization, and backed by then and a front woman for them in many ways. And it's not hard to find. This is all documented. It's there. So yeah, I recognize the pattern that you mentioned, certainly in that.
Yeah. So we haven't really talked about what you actually do in your work. Tell us about your client work and the people that you serve.
It's a mix of things. So I'm spending quite a lot of time doing a research around AI at the moment, for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working towards creating an AI for good platform, and initially a task force, as part of the bigger picture. A lot of my time is still devoted to HumaneX, which is the development that I was talking about just now, really seeking to find the ways to make that work. There's some things in the works that are very exciting, some people becoming involved who have a worldwide reputation, that we will be announcing probably next year rather than this year. So there's a lot going on in the background, and not a lot of client work, I have to say.
So it sounds like your company is one of these kind of social benefit companies, in a sense.
Yeah, it's certainly driven by purpose. That's for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we still run the crowdfunding center, and that that's mostly automated, so it does provide a little bit of income to help to keep the lights on, but not nothing like we'd like. And we're going to be with the AI for Good project. One of the things that we're looking at there is how we can use a crowdfunding technology to support that. There'll be hopefully some announcements on that too before too long as well.
Sounds exciting. Well, this has been fun. I've enjoyed hearing your thoughts and your perspective, because it's your context is different than mine, and it's good to hear those difference. I don't know whether ours is more simple or more complex. I don't know how to actually compare the two. I think we have just to figure out how are we going to personally respond to the situation as it shows itself to us every day. And
yeah, I have to admit, we kind of sit in wonder at the the divisions in we've got our own divisions, and we're headed in the same general direction, unfortunately. But the divisions in politics and the ability to entertain thinking that seems to be beyond unbalanced in some quarters. I'm choosing my words carefully again so as not to offend anyone unduly, but it beggars belief from where we're sitting that someone who had any part in suggesting, supporting anywhere near a riot or a coup might even be, allowed within a million miles of seeking office again. It seems a very strange thing from where we're sitting, but there are parallels, certainly. And
of course, I would say that you can believe nothing that you hear and see through the screen, and that's the great challenge. Is that everything is a manufactured, massaged, manipulated set of ideas that are intended to put us in a position where we don't really know, and we're all in kind of a state of paralysis in being able to say, well, this is what I want, but where do I go find that? And so that's where the network of relationships comes together, where we build those networks that affect how we live within local communities. And when a local community can say to here in the US, say no to the state or to the county, then we have a way of being able to build something from a grassroots level up to maybe change things at higher levels. I think that's where I find my hope, is that we build from the ground up, and we equip people to be leaders, and not just leaders of organizations, but leaders in terms of how they function in their day-to-day lives, in the relationships, and in the organizations where they live.
Absolutely, and we do need more of that. We've abandoned systematically in many ways our communities, and we're finding out what a mistake that was too. And we absolutely need leadership at every level, and especially locally. I agree wholeheartedly with you.
Well, we'll keep plugging away, won't we?
We will, not least because we need to, but we will, and let's hope we can make some real dents in the coming days and weeks, years.
Well, it also means that we get to bring the very best that we have to offer to the world, and I think that's also a point of hope for us, is that each one of us can make that decision to bring the very best we have to offer to the world that we know of. Maybe it's only within the reach of our hands, but we can go do that. And if we take that attitude, then I think we'll begin to be more circumspect about what we hear. We'll be less compliant as citizens. We'll be more energetic and caring for our neighbors. I think all those things can happen as a result. That's the transition we're in.
Absolutely, we need critical thinkers, people who can think for themselves. There are, as you allude, so many people whose heads are full of what the media says, uncritically consumed, and we've created a global misinformation system, haven't we? Both in the standard media and within the internet media. We've corrupted our communication channels with plugging it up with paid advertising. There's precious little room for proper communication.
And that's why I started this podcast, so that people would know that the conversation we're having is unmediated. This is just between you, the two of us, and it goes out. And if someone tries to take it down, that could happen. But there's always another place to find it. Even if it's just, okay, email me and I'll send you a link. I mean, if it's that much. But I think that when we see conversation like this happening, that's another way of understanding that there are alternatives to the way we're functioning.
Yeah,
So,
and long may it be so, and power to your elbow in building leaders locally.
thank you very much. And thank you, Barry, for being here. And I'm really glad that we connected, and look forward to seeing this new AI, say it again,
AI for good.
AI for good coming out in the new year. I think that's very, very important. So thanks a lot, Barry. And thank you everyone for watching, and please subscribe and hit the like button. And if you have a comment or a question, please let us know, and we'll be in conversation with you. And until then, I'll see you on the next episode of the Eddy Network podcast. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.